Believe it or not, even when you're terminating somebody, I truly believe you're helping someone because sometimes people don't know that they need to make that decision and you're making it for them and you hope for something better. HR is not a cost center. HR is something that brings money to the organization if people allow HR to do what it's supposed to be doing. An employee experience is about making sure that you're walking the talk and that you have leaders that listen and understand and connect with people. You have to keep your pulse on what the employees want because a lot of people just wait for the employee to come to them. We have to build trust. We have to show people we're going to help them and that we care about them first. We need to stop judging people based on what we see and start figuring out why they're doing what they're doing.
Welcome to the Agathos Consulting Podcast. I'm Seth Neds, the founder and CEO of Agathos Consulting. And today I'm honored to be joined by Reanette Etzler. Reanette has served in a variety of HR roles throughout the years. She's got over 30 years in HR as HR director, VP of HR, and she currently runs a business that provides HR coaching, consulting, and speaking engagements. Reanette, so great to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me on. I look
Yep.
forward to it.
So I always start in these conversations, I like to hear about people's background and kind of their career path, how they got into the roles they're in. So you mind sharing what drew you to HR initially?
I started as just like a target many moons ago, and they had a clerical position that also helped HR do stuff. And the clerical position was a very popular position. It was very hard to get into, and for whatever reason, they asked me to be that clerical person. So it got me doing a lot of HR stuff, and I loved it. I ended up moving down to a different area, to a different store, and they loved me. So I moved into an HR assistant position, and then my HR manager left and really advocated hugely for me to get promoted to an HR manager position. So I became an HR manager at a very young age of 20 at Target. Yeah, I was very young. I think I was the youngest HR manager in Target at that time. So I look back and I'm like, no one at 20 should be an HR manager at Target.
Was that at HR corporate or was it like a local?
No, it was at a store. So I started in Chico, California, and then I moved to Sacramento. And then
Okay.
I ended up getting asked to open a brand new store in the Bay Area. So I went and did that. And then I left shortly after that happened.
Wow.
And I took a little break from HR for a while because retail is really hard. I was at Target for 7 years. And then I moved over into banking and I love the banking world. And then I moved into the public sector. And so I've had a little private and public. And then in 2012, I went out on my own. I've had a couple of employers over the years that begged me to come work for them. And then I cave and I do it. And then I end up back out on my own again because that's where I would rather be. I'd rather help a lot of people than just one company.
Yeah.
And I get bored really easy. So I like to go in and fix things, and then I like to leave. I don't want to stick around for a while.
What do you think it is about HR that's made you want to stick within that one career path? Because some people bounce all over the place, but it
Mm.
sounds like in most of your roles, you've been in an HR related role.
I think one of the things I used to always get is I don't know how people do HR, and it's such a difficult environment. There's so much conflict, or there's so many things that you have to do. And I've always looked at HR as I'm always helping somebody. And believe it or not, even when you're terminating somebody, I truly believe you're helping someone because sometimes people don't know that they need to make that decision and you're making it for them and you hope for something better. I guess I look at that too because one of the first jobs I ever had, I got fired from because I wasn't very good at it. And that's what got me into Target. And that is what made me realize what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And so I just truly believe that you're always helping somebody, whether it be a manager because you're helping them to succeed in their department or whether you're helping an employee succeed. And I like helping people. So I think that's why I've stayed in HR.
Was the firing experience a really bad experience, or did that company provide or outplacement services or anything?
No, that was like way back in the 90s. So no one really cared about what they did when they fired. And it was a small little clothing store. And so it was one of my first little menial jobs that I had. But that led me to Target because I got a job at Target a couple weeks later. And 7 years later, I was still at Target and super successful. So yeah, the experience of being terminated was not bad. They weren't mean to me. They weren't horrible. We all agreed that it just wasn't a good fit. at that time. I was
Yeah.
18.
Yeah.
I might not have showed up to work a few times before that happened. Who knows?
So I've seen that you work a lot with companies helping them see HR as a strategic function. It doesn't seem like those go together naturally when you're just thinking about it. So how do you help companies shift their perspective and make that connection between better HR practices actually improving business outcomes?
From learning from my own mistakes, going back over the years and all the experience that I've had is when you get higher up in the organization and you start looking at their strategic objectives and you start realizing that they don't align with human resources, and also looking at and doing coaching with HR professionals and being part of a lot of HR groups, I always see HR people that want to stick with the tactical and the technical side of things. That's where they naturally fall. My side of and my how my brain works is much more of a strategic side of things, so more futuristic, looking into what we can do, what the solutions are, being results driven. And so it's a little bit, I think my mindset is a little bit different than a majority of the HR individuals. And so I see them very tactical and focusing on those technical things. But the issue is if we don't focus on the strategy and how we fit into the organizational strategy, then that's not really what the CEOs want to know. The CEOs of a billion-dollar company want to know, what is HR going to do to help us meet our strategic objectives? So Johnny Taylor, who's the head of SHRM, talks about this a lot, is we need to move away from being tactical to being strategic so that we can spend 80% of our time building strategy and 20% of our time on the tactical. And that goes back to having HR systems that work. So if we get those HR systems that work, then we can focus on, okay, you want to increase volume. I'm going to use an example when I worked in for farm credit. So we did farming loans, and that's primarily what we did. And so the first year that I was there, I was looking at their strategic objectives, and I said, "Who wrote your HR strategic objectives before I got there?" And they said, "Oh, I did." The COO or somebody wrote them, and I said, "Was HR involved?" And they said, "No." And I said, "That would make some sense to me because they don't align." And they're like, "What do you mean they don't align?" And I said, "Well, you want to increase business your volume by 10%, but what about the loan officers? So you're going to have to hire more loan officers. And here's where I see your gaps. You have a lot of inexperienced loan officers, but you're looking for a higher loan volume. And so either you're going to have to train those people up and put a training program in place to be able to get them, and they're just, the light bulb goes off that there's a lot more to the business plan that has to do with HR that HR is going to help with that people don't see. Unfortunately, they don't realize. They see HR as a cost center, and HR is not a cost center. HR is something that brings money to the organization if people allow HR to do what it's supposed to be doing. But the HR professional in the organization has to know the things that they need to be doing in order to make those things happen. Right? Google, Amazon, all those places don't get anywhere without an HR strategy. So if smaller organizations can start to look at those business objectives and how HR plays into that, then maybe they won't use a controller as an HR person or administrative assistant as an HR person. They'll actually invest in an HR professional.
So if you were talking to a medium-sized business and a CEO that's listening to this, how would you explain to them that HR is not just a cost center? In what ways does it help generate revenue or cut costs?
Mm-hmm. The easiest way that I can always explain to people is business is about people, whether you have customers or whether you have people in the business. So everybody has employees. And if you have employees, then you have human resources. Whether you have an HR professional that is actually in there managing HR or not, you have employees, right? So the biggest cost to an employer a lot of the times is turnover. And so if employees aren't happy, they're going to leave and go somewhere else for a different employee experience. So they're looking for an employee experience. That is an HR job, right? So the employee experience goes all the way from what your benefits are to how you're treated at work, how leadership runs a company, how engaged leadership is with you, how many opportunities you have, the gaps, skills gaps within the organization. It's a great question that you're asking too, because I had a business professional that helps other businesses when they plateau, right? And so I was talking to him about what I do, and I was talking about what he did. And he said, how do I know if an organization has, if a CEO needs an HR needs HR strategy, and how do I explain that to a CEO? And I said, if the company is plateauing, then they have an HR issue. And he's like, no, I would need keywords. Like, what keywords? I'm all, if they're have you there, they're plateauing. You have an HR issue, right? And so being able to share with the CEO that your turnover is costing you 7 to 8 thousand, like say we're looking at a restaurant business, so an entry level kind of position in an organization, you're looking at $7 to $8,000 every single time you turn over a person. So would you rather invest $7 to $8,000 in training and developing and having a good onboarding program and having some strategies in place, or do you want that money to just go out the door? And that's the value that HR is going to bring to you. Is it's going to reduce turnover because you're going to train your leaders how to lead. You're going to develop them into good leaders. So you're going to create a better employee experience. The other thing I would share with CEOs is skills gaps. A lot of CEOs don't always understand or realize where you have skills gaps. And going back to the plateau example is if your company is plateauing, I always ask, tell me about the supervisor in that area. If they have turnover in their area where other departments don't, I'm asking them, tell me about the supervisor in that area because you have an employee problem. You have some type of morale issue in that area. And they're like, no, it's just the job. No, it's not just the job because people know what they're getting hired on for. So there's usually something more to that. And so CEOs don't always see that. And I think that HR can help them see that bigger picture and build their organization so they start to see the return on investment. HR has to be able to show statistics on their return on investment, right?
Yeah.
So time to hire or what the turnover rate is. People don't really care about the turnover rate. What they care about is time to hire, why the turnover rate is happening. So looking at different departments. The other one I really like for CEOs to look at that has to do with HR is the cost per employee to do business. And that's the statistics that I'll share in a training that I do on HR strategy. And people are like, oh, I never thought about that one before. But if our costs are going up, then our costs per employee are going up, right? So we need to figure out why is that. And so we need to figure out what's the minimal cost that we want an employee to be, and then figure that into how do we build strategy around that.
For the cost, do you do just like an average cost per employee across all all employees and all
Yes.
costs? Or okay,
If you took the total revenue versus your what the costs are, or like what you want your revenue to be,
yeah.
and then you divide that by how many employees you have, then you have a cost per employee.
Is there a percentage that is
I think it varies by
okay?
organization. When I was at Farm Credit, our cost per person was like 1474 or something like that. And
Gotcha.
so if we're looking at our strategic plan, we would look at, okay, we're increasing this by this much. This is going to increase some of our costs by this much. So how much do we need to increase our revenue by to keep our number or our cost per employee to the same amount,
Makes
right?
sense.
Unless we're saying we're going to increase that cost by 2% across the board. So there's different strategies you have to put in place in order to make those happen. And that's not just a business operation, it's an HR operation as well.
Yeah.
HR has to understand that though, and they have to understand the business. I think so many people understand HR, but they don't understand the business.
To that point, I was curious from the different companies you worked at and people you've consulted with. Does HR tend to get pretty siloed and just do HR stuff and doesn't look upstream, downstream?
Yes, absolutely. So they get very siloed in policing. And so Johnny Taylor from SHRM was talking about the fact that we need to stop policing and start being a actual business partner. And so they changed the titles on HR a while back on HR business partners, but they're still not being partners. They're still being HR police.
Yeah.
And so I call them HRPs, HR police. We need to quit policing and being a part of the business and start talking about the business, right? So I think I got lucky at Target because I started as a cashier and I learned the sales floor, I learned the stock team. So I had learned everything going to HR. And so I always knew how the store ran and functioned. So when I went into banking the first time, the tellers would be out there busy on Friday afternoons, and I would go out there and help them at the window, and I would just pick up as I went along. So I got involved in the business. I knew what was happening. I knew how to do things. And same, every business I've been in, I wanted to know exactly all the way down to operations, how people do things and how it works. And that's where HR has to be. They have to be a part of the business and they have to talk business sense, not just HR.
Yeah, I think it's a pattern across different roles, whether it's HR, marketing, IT, accounting. You really have to understand how the business works and then how you fit into that big picture to fit well into the whole strategy.
And that's our big challenge is how do we get small businesses to think that way and get people in there that have that mindset to do that other than just their job or being siloed in their area.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier about the employee experience. What are some mistakes you've seen companies make in trying to create a good employee experience?
Employee experience isn't just about the compensation and benefits. It starts all the way from the beginning of time, right? So, how we market the job, how that experience is when they're going through the recruiting process. So, if we're using recruiters, this is one of the biggest mistakes that I see is people use recruiters, but they don't tell the recruiter, you are marketing for my company. And so if you tell somebody you're going to call them back, you need to call them back because that's a representation of my company. Because you see recruiters do this all the time. They'll just ghost you after a while. And it's all the way from marketing from the very beginning to bringing them on board, going through the onboarding process. Onboarding process isn't a 1 day experience. It is like a 90 day, 6 month, 1 year experience of how things are going. But the biggest thing is obviously leadership. And we can have all kinds of people in an organization that are in executive roles that are not leaders. They can lead a company to success, but they're not leaders in the organization, which doesn't create a good employee experience. And so, one of the examples I can give you is an employer that I worked for a very short time until I saw some of the ethical things that they were doing. They thought they created a good employee experience because the CEO went and high fived everybody every day. And they did all of these little games where people could win $100. But behind the scenes, as an HR professional, I was seeing some of the things that were happening, like people not being paid correctly. And then I would bring that up and I would correct that. So we would put a contract together and I would pay him out so much money because you didn't pay him correctly. I would negotiate a payout for them. It was salespeople. They weren't making the right amount of money. They weren't getting paid overtime the way that they were doing sales or sales commissions. And so what they ended up doing was putting the contract together and then took out the dollar amount. So basically just made people sign away what that they weren't ever going to sue and that they were okay that they never got paid that money moving forward. And so to me, that's creating a very poor employee experience. An employer can't take their way out. And so an employee experience is about making sure that you're walking the talk and that you have leaders that listen and understand and connect with people. It's about bringing people together that fill gaps but have different perspectives and allow them to have those different perspectives because people want to be creative, right? A lot of people want to be creative in their job. They want to have opportunity, they want autonomy. So what are the experiences that your employees are looking for? It's going to be different for someone out at PNNL than someone as a that's a researcher than someone that is doing administrative assistant at PNNL, right? It's going to be a different experience, but the leaders have to understand that from each area. And so when we can get people that are actually leading and not just managing and supervising, then it creates a better employee experience. And people want that experience. It's different than the word culture and all of that. It's about experience. I think culture is an overused word. I think the employee experience really speaks more volumes to what people are looking for right now. They're looking for a better experience because they have to go there every day. You've got to make the experience fun and worth it and educate them.
What do you think the best ways for a CEO to measure employee experience or get a baseline of how he's doing and then actually improve each year?
There's so much in technology these days that you can do, looking at attendance and measuring attendance. If somebody's attendance is dropping off or somebody's participation in something, it's say somebody was super active and really wanted to be engaged and now it's dropping off and maybe they're calling in sick or they're not attending meetings like they were or they're coming to meetings and they're not bringing things up. There's all kinds of indicators that we can see that we just don't pay attention to. AI has so many analytics these days that you can use. You can put them into some of your systems to measure people's mental health. I'm curious to how some of this will go as far as ethics and people saying, oh, you're monitoring what I'm saying. I don't think that AI necessarily looks and says, oh, this person said this. I think it's measuring predictive behaviors, saying, this person isn't responding much to emails. We can predict that they're probably going to leave in 3 to 4 months. There's AI tools out there right now that can do that kind of stuff. If people are scared of AI, there's still the measurables. If we have high turnover in an area, if we have especially a manager that has higher turnover than others, if there's a position that keeps turning over, then there must be something going on with the position that we need to look at. Maybe there's too much responsibility. Maybe they're bored. Maybe they don't have enough responsibility. Maybe we need to make some changes. So there's a lot of indicators that I just don't think that sometimes business owners don't take the time to think about why are we losing so many people in this role, or how come we're losing so many people in general. Obviously we're not leading well, we're not managing well, but you get some people that just are like, well, they don't want to work here, they don't want to work here. Typically baby boomers aren't going to like me for saying this, but baby boomer generation is usually the ones that aren't going to create a better experience. It is what it is when they hire you, and not going to bend on that for the most part.
Have you worked with this? Is there a role in restaffing or hiring internally and moving people around that helps with employee retention? I'm thinking about like how you help people find what they're best at.
Yeah, I have not done any as far as consulting. It hasn't really been my area. However, when I was at Farm Credit, one of the things that we did is like career tracking, giving them some career tracks and opportunities. So we had a couple of different tracks that people could take to promote within the organization. So whether it be that you want to promote as a loan officer, do you want to be like a chief credit officer, and that's the route that you want to take. So we created opportunities for them, and we created tracks for them and how they could get there. We also, along with those tracks, you can't just create tracks without creating some type of leadership program for them to go through. The one thing that's about Farm Credit that's great is that they're co-ops, so there's other co-ops that they work with in order to provide training. So they had like leadership trainings that would be like 1 week programs that people could go to, and then they build up. There's 3 programs that they go through. It's super expensive, but worth it, right? We got a lot of value out of sending people to those. You just have to have the training opportunities for them to go along with that and spend
Yeah.
time with the employee to succeed in those career tracks. So I think, and then the other opportunity is, I've seen employers where they put out spreadsheets and they ask people, what do you want to do? One of the things we did at Target at one point was we actually, all the HR managers, because some of them wanted to promote out of HR into other operational type roles. So they did interviews with all of us just to find out, what do you want to do as an HR professional at Target? What's your ultimate goal? Is it to move up in corporate, or is it to move into a bigger store, a higher volume store? What is it that you want to do? So I think that you have to keep your pulse on what the employees want, because a lot of people just wait for the employee to come to them. The employee's not going to feel comfortable coming and talking to you.
So for a CEO that maybe is struggling with hiring or finding the right candidates, do you have any tips for just good hiring practices?
Yes. So if the company does not have mission and values, they need to figure out what type of values are they looking, what values do they have for the organization. If they don't have a mission statement and they don't have values, then they need to start there. Because if you have values and a mission statement, there's a couple of things we can do with that. Is one is when you're hiring, you're asking questions based on those values and the standards that you want in an individual, and it keeps your mission going forward, right? So a lot of people will write their mission and they have their values, but they don't do anything with them. And sometimes they can't even recite and tell you what they are. But if your questions are aligned with those values and that mission, then you're going to hire people that are aligned with your values and your mission, right? The other thing is using those values and mission statements in performance evaluations so that employees know how they are doing as far as achieving those values and mission for the organization. So if the organization's doing really well, then maybe they're succeeding in meeting those values and missions. So that is where I would start, because the other part of that is skills gaps. And so If you have turnover, where are your gaps in the organization? And AI is a great tool for that as well, because you can put into AI, maybe I go back to banking probably because I spent more time in banking, but say I'm struggling with finding somebody that understands almond orchards. And so we don't have a lot of loans in almond orchards or apples or something. I could put into Chat GPT and be like, hey, we're having issues. We don't have a lot of loans in this area. And it can tell me exactly where my skills gaps are and who I probably need to hire in the future. I could also even go to the next level of saying where to find those people at. So AI is such a good tool to use at this point. It can also, you can upload your job description into AI and say, what are my skills gaps compared to this resume? So you can upload the resume into AI and see where the gaps are. Is this person going to fill the gaps that you're looking to fill? So it all starts with hiring and hiring the right people, but you have to know what your standards are before you do that. Otherwise, you're just going to keep hiring like minded people, and not have any people that are filling some of those other areas. Like, that's who I'm going to hire. It's called the halo effect.
Yeah.
Ooh, I really get along well with this person. I'm going to hire them.
Have
Hire
you
people that
ever
are not like yourself.
have you ever incorporated or seen companies incorporate personality tests into the hiring process?
Yes. I mean, I do have employers. There's some DISC assessments that you can use for hiring. There's also, I've used predictive index before, which is really good. There are a lot of things out there that you can use, but assessments are really good. There's some free assessments online that they can have people take as well. I'm a big fan of DISC, and if you have an organization that has a lot of people that are S's and C's or C's and S's, then you're going to really have a really hard time driving results in that organization. You need somebody with a D style, you need some influence. And I see that a lot in organizations. I got into farm credit, I started learning about DISC. We did DISC. I was the only D in the organization, and most of those people have been with the organization for 10 or more years. And so having a D come in when they're used to C's and S's or used to C's and S's, they thought I was crazy. And they're super helpful because you
Yeah.
see where your gaps are and you'll know what you need. Even though you may not get along with that style, you know what you need
Yes.
in order to make that happen.
So, can you share about a time that you helped an HR professional achieve really a significant breakthrough in their HR practices?
I was thinking about this last night, and I'm like, I have talked to so many HR people and seen so many HR people promote within the organization just based on coaching or giving them the tools and stuff to succeed. And I was just like, I can't think of one specific situation because I've seen so many people be successful in HR. I've had several people promote from under me into HR positions that you have to take the time to teach them, to show them the leadership and the opportunities that they have to move forward and how to interact with people differently. And you have to spend the time with them. I had this girl one time, she was in Chico State, and she was in the HR program to get her degree in HR. And so one of the business guys that I knew, he reached out to me and said, hey, this girl wants to go into HR management. And so I took her to, at the time, I was negotiating for a union contract, and I took her down to union negotiation. And she said, I learned more today than I ever did in my 4 years of college. And so when you hear things like that and you're able to help people like that, it's just a significant opportunity to know that as HR professionals, we can do better. Like, I've done stuff at high schools and I've seen people be successful from some of the tools and things that they put together to present through high schools.
What role did coaching and mentoring have in your career trajectory? Were there different people that came alongside and coached you and mentored you?
Absolutely. I had some great store managers at Target. So I feel like I was very lucky at Target to get a really good jump start in that. I actually talked to one of my old store managers, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago. And I was talking about how young I was and how cranky I was a lot. And he said, no, Reanette, he goes, I never saw that in you. He said, I saw that you were the one person that was going to get out of retail and be successful. And he's all, and you were the only one that got out of retail. And so I had some really good store managers that would really call me out on stuff. He was one of them. I remember he came to me one time and said, you're going on vacation this week. And I think that it would be really beneficial for you to read the 7 habits of highly effective people. And I said, oh, really? And at that age, I was like 24 at that time. So I was very defensive and I was thinking, what the heck? And he said, and really, maybe particularly chapter number 5. Chapter number 5 is first listen to understand. And I took that and led that. I also had a really good CEO at Farm Credit who's very supportive of HR, and probably one of the first CEOs I had that was really supportive of human resources and understood the purpose of human resources and gave me that autonomy to do the things I needed to do. But also, once I left and went out on my own, I realized like we have to continue to have that mentorship in our life. And that was part of the reason why I joined the John Maxwell team, was because there's so many mentors that I can look at for leadership development, and people in my own life that I've met over the last couple of years that are people that I look to for leadership advice. I think you have to surround yourself with mentors and people that are farther advanced than you and also can give you honest feedback and perspective, because we won't grow if we're not open and vulnerable to that feedback. When I was at Farm Credit, I had not only a great CEO, but he also allowed us to do this coaching program with this really intense, crazy coach. I learned a ton from that. So that was probably my biggest growth opportunity, was when I had that time with that coach. It was a really intense 6-week coaching program that took us like 20 hours a week to accomplish the stuff that we needed to. And that was really helpful. We have to keep doing that in order
Yeah.
to grow and develop.
What do you think in your different leadership roles has been one of your biggest lessons you've learned on leadership?
That you have to build a connection first before you start just plowing in. And that's hard for me because I'm a D style, so I'm dominant and tend to want results. But the flip side of that is, if we dive in, especially in human resources, we have to build the trust. We have to show people we're going to help them and that we care about them first. But if we jump in and try to do the opposite, then we end up the police and people shut down. They don't want to come to HR. They don't want to talk to HR. And so that can not only affect human resources, but you as an individual, right? So, like me personally, as an individual, people have a perspective of who you are. And it's really hard to change that once you've done that, even though your goal was just to really help them. And people don't realize sometimes, like, I'm an employee too. I want a good employee experience. I'm doing this because I want a good experience, not because I'm trying to torture you. And building that relationship and building that trust. When I was at Farm Credit, my CEO had been there for years, so he was really ready to jump in and fix things. And so I jumped in and fixed things, and that came with a lot of backlash.
Hmm.
And I had to rebuild a lot of relationships through that. So that was a huge learning experience for me.
What are some ways for a new leader or someone coming into a new company? What are some tips for building connections?
Yeah, so I think it's really getting to know a little bit about them. And so, and connection, one of the things I really learned about connection is it's not about me, it's about you. So, being able to talk to the person that I'm talking to, sitting back, listening, looking at the landscape, listening to different people with different perspectives, different thought processes, see how things are run now, maybe fix a couple of things here and there that are going to benefit people, but really standing back and looking at the big picture. Like, instead of jumping in and saying, on your first meeting, you hear somebody's violating some kind of compliance thing and you're like, oh, you can't do that. And instead, just listening to and jotting it down. Oh, compliance issue 122 that I need to work on. The thing is, if they're going to get caught about it, they're already going to get caught about it. Like, it's not going to go away. So you can't change it overnight. But if you change it over in time, people are going to be more receptive to it. And so I think sitting back, building that connection is about listening to what they're doing, just having conversations with people, getting to know them, understand what their interests are, where they want to go, where they've been, not just jumping in and saying, okay, this is how you need to do your job. And the other thing is, connection means finding that common ground. So just because I would get from point A to point B by doing A, Y, and Z, doesn't mean that you have to do A, Y, and Z, right? It means that as long as we're coming to the same place and it's not taking more time, it doesn't matter how you get it done. And so that's connection, like supporting, giving people autonomy to do their job and supporting them through that. I also think it's really important, especially with your own team and others, that you don't throw people under the bus. So if there's something that comes up, is get more information about it before we judge or we're quick to make a decision that this is exactly what happened. But we need to stop judging people based on what we see and start figuring out why they're doing what they're doing, right? Because we all have different styles, we all have a different personality. And tell you how many times I've gone into an HR job and they're like, we need to fire this person tomorrow. I'm like, I don't have any information on this person. I'm not firing them tomorrow. Well, David should have been gone a long time ago. We just haven't had anybody here to do it. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not your person. We're gonna vet this out. I'm gonna find out what's going on. And I've seen people be more successful by just asking them a few questions about what it is that's going on with them. How managers come, I want to terminate this person. Maybe you asked them why they're not showing up to work. Is there something in their personal life that's happening? I can't ask them that. Yes, you can. You don't need to know the details. Just say, hey, I see that you're not showing up to work and this isn't like you. Oh, okay. So those are building connections, showing that you care about somebody. My biggest advice I could give to anybody is just build relationships, just like you would with someone in a grocery store.
Yep.
You're looking to make friends, exact same way. It's just listen.
So as you've seen different trends come and go and different approaches to HR, how do you see HR evolving in the next few years?
I think that HR professionals that want to be successful really need to move into understanding AI and the benefits that AI can have in their department. I think that they need to start looking at utilizing the tools more than 20%. If you look at, as we talked about a little bit earlier, is that we have people that have systems that work, but they're using 10 to 25, 20% of that system, like an HRS system, when they should be using 80% of it to get analytics to automate things. I was watching a webinar yesterday of this guy that was showing how we're still giving them a piece of paper to change their address. And it's, if we want to move past that and we want to focus on people, then we need to automate and be spending 20% of our time on automated stuff and then 80% of our time in the business, understanding the business, getting out what I would call on the sales floor. Like I did when I was in HR at Target, I was still on the sales floor. I would help people stock shelves. Like I was still doing those things because you got to understand the business. So we have to implement those basic HR analytics, chatbots, whatever we can do to automate that stuff. AI is not going to replace you because there's always people behind AI. What will replace you are the people that know how to use AI because you don't. It goes back to the day and age when computers came out and people didn't want to learn computers. If you don't understand computers and you don't want to use them, then someone that does know how to use a computer is going to replace you. And that's what's going to happen with AI. It's just going to get more and more use. And if people don't start using it, then it's not going to help HR to move forward. HR has to move forward using those automations. I also think that it'll be interesting to see how we move past the DEI stuff that's going on right now. And I know this is very controversial, but I have no problem talking about it. Is that just because federally they're saying no DEI, it doesn't mean, first of all, I don't know why we needed a program called DEI because we already had discrimination and harassment in training in the workplace. And if we were doing anything, we had leadership development, which kind of encompasses all of that. And then they had to put a title on it to make it specific about something. And so I think we need to focus on creating a good employee experience. That's about leadership development. It's about making sure that people understand what discrimination, harassment means in the workplace and that's prohibited in the workplace. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next year or so regarding the DEI stuff and how businesses go strategically away from that and move more into that digital literacy world.
What do you think are some of the most exciting AI applications or uses of AI specifically related to HR?
Oh my gosh. I've done a lot of delving into them. The unfortunate thing is because I'm independent, I can't go into Bamboo HR and look at what Bamboo HR has to offer. For me, the research and all the research that I've done, there's two things. Is one is the fact that if that we can analytically tell people that are mentally either burned out or are going to leave the organization soon. The other tool that I've dug into quite a bit, because I'm working on a big project right now with workers' comp down in California. And so we were looking at a bunch of AI stuff for workers' comp. And there's AI that can actually, like, you put your cases in there and it'll tell you if that case is going to get out of hand or how to settle that case sooner. The other thing, though, that I think AI can be life changing when it comes to the simplicity of just Chat GPT, or I use Claude. I quit using Chat GPT, but I started using Claude. And it's a life changer with conversations if you really want it to be. Because if you are understanding your style and then you have to have a meeting with somebody that maybe you don't get along with, or maybe you need to get a message out to employees that is going to be difficult. The fact that it can, you put your message in there, you could type it up and then say, make this better. And it'll even tell you, I took the sarcasm out or I took the accusations out or whatever. Like it can be really life changing when it comes to conversations. And so if people really use that in the workplace for conversations, I think it'd be super beneficial. The second thing that I think it's amazing for is self-development. So being able to go in there, I just did a webinar not too long ago on using it for self-development to build out your strategic plan for your own life, things that you want to do. You could do it for your business or just for your own personal. And you put in things that you want to fix or you want to change and what books can I read, what time frames. You can tweak all of that, but it's pretty fascinating what it can do for you. It's pretty amazing. And I think that the HR professionals really need to jump in, and it can build leadership programs for them, leadership trainings for them. And it doesn't take all of the time that they feel that those things would take. That's where I think people need to focus.
I know you also do public speaking and you talk about HR leadership, development of leaders, self coaching, and AI in HR. What topic is your favorite?
Probably strategic HR.
Okay.
I also just started talking about two other topics is one about judgment and how we judge each other and how do we stop that from happening and connect with people instead. But the other one that I've talked about in HR that I don't think that people really realize is how much trauma HR experiences over a lifetime. And because of the things that come to our attention, like if I go back, I've spoken about this a couple of times at some conferences, and it's called HR Trauma, the First Responders. And they're oftentimes first responders to things and people don't realize. If you think about the fires down in LA, HR's had to deal with some of those people probably lost their houses, but having to deal with the impact of health benefits and people losing their homes and how do they get their 401k money and listening to their stories. Like they probably listen to more stories than anybody listens to the experiences that they've dealt with. Over the years, I've dealt with some pretty gnarly cases and investigations that left a huge impact. And so when I speak about that at events, people are just like, gosh, I never realized it until now. And now I'm thinking of all of these things that I've dealt with over time, family members that die, or I had an employee one time that another employee went to their house to do a wellness check and they found him dead. It's like working through all of that as an HR professional is it over time, it's a lot. Yeah, police deal with a lot too, and it's not much different
Yeah.
than what police officers or firefighters deal with on a regular basis. And during COVID, who dealt with all of that during COVID? HR did. That's another topic I started talking about.
Do you have any favorite business books that you'd recommend?
I do. So my favorite books would be I love Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey Jr. because a lot of times the employee experience could be measured by trust. And when we don't trust our executives, our leadership, then there's a breakdown, right? And then that trickles down. So I would say Speed of Trust. And then my other favorite book is 16 Invaluable Laws of Growth by John Maxwell. And probably because self development wise, it really led me through a journey of learning more about myself and understanding how to react to things and how to be a better leader. Those would be a couple of my favorites.
For people who want to connect with you, what would be the best way to reach out to you?
Through LinkedIn or through my website. I'm working on my website right now because I'm making some changes, but in my focus a little bit to more of the strategic and not so much the HR consulting kind of day-to-day activity stuff. But through my website, or they can reach me through LinkedIn, email, any of the above. Yeah.
I'll be sure to put all that in the show notes.
All
Well,
right.
thanks so much for joining the show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Seth. I appreciate it.